The title does not lie. Today we're going to walk through how I make storyboards and thumbnails and outline my sequential art. That is, graphic novels and comics. It's been a couple of weeks since I've updated this project. My dog got a really bad spinal injury, but she's been feeling much better. But I've still captured quite a bit of footage in the creation of Silverbell in the last 2 weeks. The pre-launch page for Silverbell is linked below if you wish to join our campaign. But without further ado, here's the storyboard process for a handful of pages for Silverbell. We have now reached the number of outlined pages in Silverbell, which only means one thing. Today is storyboarding day. Storyboarding day. Now I get it. I understand that most cartoonists and comics artists and graphic novelists don't call it storyboarding. They call it thumbnailing. I call it storyboarding. Doesn't matter. Same thing. Now, I don't come from cartooning and I don't come from comics or graphic novels. I primarily come from books. I wrote books. I wrote short fiction. I would draw some concept art, character pieces, portraits, maps, all the sorts and bits and bobs that allow you to flesh out a story in your head. So when the original bell ringer popped in my mind, it was pretty crystal clear to me that it was going to be two things. Black and white. I spent decades drawing on the back of my homework in that style, and that transitioned later into Dungeons & Dragons journals, or just large sketchbooks where I would carry around with me all the time, working on character art for my books. I don't find my style particularly sophisticated. I just call it the back of the homework style. If you read the first bell ringer book and what's coming out of book 2, it's fairly rudimentary from a cartooning standpoint, even though I'm very proud of the storytelling. When I began thinking visually, it was excessively clear this was an entirely different medium, except for me at work. I'd always spent time visualizing my books. So the transition wasn't difficult, it was just different. When it comes to art, I strive for eloquence, communication. That's it. I wanted a protagonist that was primarily silent. I wanted there to be mystery in the panels. I wanted there to be thought and room for wonder in between the black and white. Include quite a bit of graphic style, but then some traditional line art techniques. Combine what I was good at and also challenging myself on each and every page. With each page attempting a new technique, attempting a new panel layout, trying to push myself that I could learn the basics quickly. So I started reading a lot of comics. I started reading a lot of manga. I started running around, especially reading indie work because I wanted my stuff to be distinct, and I figured that it would fit in mostly independent work rather than it would be what you would find on a Barnes & Noble shelf. Now, my original storyboards, which were meant to be drawn and inked at 11 by 17 on Bristol, all those storyboards were done on 8.5 by 11 paper, so I kind of measured down so that I would have the right ratio. Those first couple stories have a lot of symmetry or a lot of callbacks page to page. I wanted each spread to be a piece of art. I went forward, challenged myself further, and made that initial 80 or 90 page book. I made quite a few storyboards on 8.5 by 11 paper, and then I switched to index cards. And I was tired of cutting my paper down and then having this giant stack of 8.5 by 11 just sitting on my desk piling up, where I'd have to flip through the whole thing, and I didn't feel like I had a grasp on how things would actually render on the page. I also didn't sense any objectivity coming from that giant pile. Because they were rendered at larger scale, they didn't feel as dismissive. So rather than feeling like sketches, they felt like the final story. And going back and changing things actually became psychologically difficult. So when I switched to these guys, I felt like I could take 10 pages here and 10 pages there and switch them out. And I had stacks of different versions of the story on my desk. Hence, this right here, this is the first page of book 2. This is the first story of book 2. All 32 pages of it. Getting into book 2 required many different drafts and many different versions of the story, which began to tie into Silverbell and tie into other things. And when it comes to the Bell Ringer titular series, I go right from index card to ink. I draw this guy out, I do all 30 pages, 20 to 30 pages of the story, and then I sit down and go page by page. I pencil maybe 5-6 pages at a time, and then I ink them all in succession. It's easier for me to do it that way. It feels better with my tools to do it that way. Silverbell is a different beast entirely. Whenever I first kind of conceived of Silverbell back in December of 2024, my wife and I, Taylor, got married, and then my brother got both of us really beautiful leather-bound journals from Jenny Blick. They're an awesome stationery store, journal making shop in Washington, D.C. The book was this really lovely grayish color, the gray beige. That's kind of all the trend these days, but it's really, really pretty. Whenever he gave me this book, maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks after I discovered Silverpoint via YouTube. Whenever I got that book, I began writing the story and writing my ideas for it the way that I would actually outline a novel. Everything that I could write went into that journal or went into a note on my phone and then went into that journal. When I began ideating in a narrative sense, it felt more like a novel. So the transition to sequential art, it needed and called for a separate tool. The journal was lined. I can't thumbnail, I can't storyboard in that journal. And I thought, I love Midori. They lay flat so I can see the spreads. They're the perfect size because I knew that I wanted a 9 by 12. and the Midori is just about half that size in each dimension. So I got a blank one, and I started, boom, right away, and pretty much immediately had the first few pages storyboarded out. Now, as time went on, I realized the realization crept forward I would not be able to do to this project as I do for the titular bell ringer series. Silverpoint is a really tough medium. Every single one of these giant 18 by 24 boards that I'm painting on, it screams permanence. It screams, you fucked up. So if you don't get it right, if you mess up the story, there's really no going back. You have to buy another board. You have to prepare another board. It sets you back a whole day's worth of work. I can't really afford that. And I can't afford to have the story wrong at a small scale and then begin rendering it and realize, oh, I hate these 20 pages, which is what I did with book 2. Not going to happen here. No more of that. If I'm making this 18 by 24 book, maybe I should have giant storyboards. Maybe I should take those tiny pages and that'll be my first draft of the book and do it in chunks of whatever moment in the story that I'm feeling at that time. Do the small version in my Midori notebook and then cut and grab the giant book and draw huge, almost at scale sketches. So that's what I do. Now I do the little ones and then I do the big ones, and it's actually consolidated quite a few pages. I want the book to be driven by your feeling rather than what it is saying to you, if that makes sense. And sometimes that requires big cuts or large additions. Doing it in this manner, having 2 entire drafts of storyboards, has not only improved the way that I work and the way I think I will work going forward in Bellringer Books 3 and so on and so forth, but I also think that it's creating a tightness to the narrative and an intimacy to Silverbell herself's narrative that I did not necessarily expect. It's almost as if I feel as comfortable in this format as I did novels when I started this. Anyhow, let's go. So let's talk about this page, because this is probably my favorite drawing experience so far in the book, even though it's only the second page. I think part of that is actually because it is the second page. Being day 2 of this sprint, there was so much to learn and so much to have fun with. The story kind of always going through changes has also helped me evolve and tackle each sequence with a renewed sense of vigor. So if you're looking at this page, the information that I wish to convey, we are trying to communicate her body being torn apart, the pain and agony and fear of that. So we go directly to her arm, make it personal, come close and be intimate, and then we zoom out to show the whole. Whenever we scale that up to the larger format, so if you look closely, these are simple. I know exactly what I want to say, right? I don't need to go into explicit detail for myself on how to create this. This is splintered wood. This is the arm of the doll. Connect us to a grounded piece of reality that everybody has seen. Everybody knows what a wooden mannequin arm looks like or feels like. And then we rip that apart. Whenever we're scaling up, I wanted the energy of the scene, the color, the paint here, and then move forward and show just a tad more detail for myself. How do I want it to break? How do I want it to feel? And then we zoom out to her. I went from this pose, which looked a little more like she was swimming or lost in the lake, lost in thought, sort of, as if I couldn't necessarily feel what was happening here. And again, all I'm striving for is communication, the clear communication of feeling. If you don't necessarily know what's going on, that's okay, but I need you to feel what the character is feeling. Sometimes that is the unknown, right? I liked this pose significantly more whenever we scaled up. It looks almost like she tripped, fell over, hits her head, that sort of thing. Now the biggest change to this page happens at the bottom. Originally we have these 2 panels that transition to these 2 panels. That is supposed to be her sort of streaking through the void, going through the cosmos, right? Her now bodiless soul traveling through the great expanse. The issue with this is that this page does not need to say this. This page should not be saying this, because this page's focus is on her. She is the focus. The destruction of her body is what we are trying to say. It is what we are trying to feel. There is no reason to show her escape. That is a reveal for the flip of the page, and the entire next spread will deal with the outcome and the consequences of the scene. So, whenever we scaled up, while I kept it in the final page, it's gone. Now the biggest difference here is obviously color. I don't even have swatches on here, and I want to feel that day of. If something gets messed up, I wipe a paper towel over it, but Something that I think is true for myself anyway. If I were to render this early, take all these little details, all these bending, warped, breaking splinters of wood, if I were to render that here, I think it would lose the magic. I think that I would lose a little bit of momentum. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to being astounded, when it comes to being surprised. I want to go to sleep that night and feel smacked across the face with how much fun it was to draw these scenes. And that is where this one comes in. Because as you can see, there are no limbs left. In the original renderings, she still has a body here. And what I hadn't realized is that this is what I wanted. True destruction, desecration. These bright whites, almost a nod or a suggestion of empty space. Her soul is attached to the bell in that bright, beautiful blue, but it's in contrast and in combat. It is aggressively opposed to the remainder of the page, which are these dark blood, inky reds, blacks, purples. Her arms are gone, her limbs are gone. It is merely a shadowed silhouette of a mannequin's body. That is how we take the original page and we scale it up in our sketchbook, and then we take it to the finale.
Do you want to go play Frisbee? Do you want to go play Frisbee? Do you want to go play Frisbee? 1, 2, 3.